It's Viewpoints on the Talk Station FM 107.1. And today's program, in light of the fact that this is being aired on Memorial Day, has been pre-recorded. And I pre-recorded it for several reasons. One, initially to give our guests an opportunity to consider the questions and the situation, but also time to give ourselves a time to breathe, if you will, here on Memorial Day. I'm going to make a personal note as we begin the program. I think this day is very important for a variety of reasons. Obviously, recognizing the value and the importance of our national identity. I mean, it is, in fact, the result of the warriors, our men and women in uniform, that we do celebrate and enjoy so much here in the United States, and particularly this holiday weekend, which, interestingly enough, was really not a nationally recognized holiday until just 53 years ago, 1971. I was looking it up. It was an interesting concept. I hadn't even considered it, but it was announced as Memorial Day. It was determined then. Previous to that, it had been Decoration Day, and it was a day where basically going back to Civil War times, an effort was to just recognize the fallen in that horrendous and horrific war of American against American. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, it is the one war with the highest number of American casualties. Well, obviously. So this day is an important day historically. It's also an important day culturally because it, again, represents something that is very American. In the European community, they have Remembrance Day, and that Remembrance Day is conducted in relationship to 11/11/11. That is Veterans Day, and that's November 11th, and of course goes back to the armistice of World War I, the war to end all wars. Of course, that didn't happen, and worldwide, it's recognized as Remembrance Day. But we have our own Remembrance Day, and it comes, as I mentioned a moment ago, out of the very memories and the, if you will, the healing associated with the Civil War. So there is, again, the cultural issue. And then, if you will, there's the emotional issue. And this is one that we're going to be talking about this afternoon here on Viewpoints. And that is a topic associated with those who were left behind. I feel very strongly about that for a variety of reasons, personal, and I'll leave it at that. And another personal reason are the guests that we're going to have today here on Viewpoints. And I want to thank them for their patience with me as I opine here at the opening, also with their patience with me to constantly lean on them, which I will say I fear that I'm in some regards dredging up memories and experiences that I don't know that they can forget. As a matter of fact, Jim Slape is going to share with this something he said to me several years back that I've never forgotten. As a matter of fact, poignantly remembered and used in a recent editorial in the News Times. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So joining us this afternoon for a few moments before we go to the break, we have Trish and Jim Slape, the parents of Sergeant James Slape, and who died in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And let's start with that program and the background on that. Trish, Jim, good afternoon. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it greatly.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. We appreciate you having us.
Well, you're very kind because you and we've talked about this previously. Personally, you know my feelings very strongly about this, and I've known both of you for a gazillion years. I knew your children running around in church, getting in trouble.
Yes.
So I remember them well. Let's talk about Jim as we begin the program. Background where he was, by the way, he was in the National Guard, right?
Yes, he was Army National Guard here in North Carolina.
Army National Guard in active duty in Afghanistan.
Yes.
All right. Little background. How did he get into how did he get into this?
Well, I mean, we live in a military community. and he comes from military family. We both on both sides of our family had military um, parents, grandparents. So that wasn't that far of a jump for him. As he was finishing up high school, we got talking about college and options and opportunities, and he and a couple of his buddies were talking about the different services, and we met with the National Guard recruiter, and it started as a joke, but the recruiter mentioned EOD, explosive ordnance disposal, and mom that I am said, yeah, that's not an option. Jimmy kept coming back to it, and he started researching it, and he's like, that really looks interesting. And so we went back to the recruiter, spoke with him, and decided that it was doable. And so Jimmy, prior to graduating his senior year, he enlisted in the National Guard. That summer he went to boot camp and then went on to his explosive ordnance training in Florida, and graduated from there in 2015. And in 2018 he deployed to Afghanistan.
All right, Jim, as a father talking to a son, here he is going into the military, by the way, doing something very dangerous. I was involved in ammunition myself in the Navy, had EODs aboard our ship, things of this nature. What was your conversation with him as a father?
Well, I think first you want him to be sure he knows what he's getting himself into, and you want him to be sure as well that he's really considered every aspect of this, and he's making the decision that he feels is right. Certainly, as a parent, you don't necessarily agree with that decision, but obviously he wanted to do that. He wanted to go into that, and you have to support that. Your kids reach an age where they've got to make their own decisions, and they've got to sort of lay out their future, and that's what he chose.
We're talking, of course, with Jim and Trish Slape about their son, Sergeant Jim Slape, in Army National Guard. Jim, National Guard, a lot of people don't anticipate something of that nature being active duty. What was your conversation with him on that?
I don't think we expected it to be
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
I mean,
right. You think of National Guard, you think of it being more local and more, here in North Carolina, or at least in the U.S.
National Guards gets called upon in cases of hurricanes and that,
natural emergencies. Yeah.
Right. And then to deploy to Afghanistan certainly was a bit of a shock. I mean, we knew a bit in advance that he was going to deploy, but you really don't expect it to be a full Army deployment. You expect it to be a much shorter, much simpler deployment. But
one other aspect about this, not only was he deploying to Afghanistan, but he was married.
Yes, he had gotten married a few months before he deployed.
I'm looking at you, Trish. In many regards, I can appreciate, we men don't think about that. Ladies do. I mean, here you're getting married, you've dedicated your life, you've altering your whole career, changing your last name, everything else, and then your husband's leaving for a theater of war, of real threat. What conversations did you have with Jim before he left related to that? Was there saying, okay, Jim, you're leaving behind a wife? That's a tough story.
Well, we talked. Yeah, now conversations and everything kind of run together. We did talk, and we actually, as a family, decided for her to move in with us while he was deployed. So she actually stayed with us during the deployment.
Okay, that's going to be a topic of another discussion here in just a moment in light of our conversation related to Sergeant Jim Slape, and whose honor this program is being devoted, as well as to all of those who have fallen in service to this country. But, and this is the big but, to the loved ones left behind. You're listening to Viewpoints on the Talk Station. Viewpoints on the Talk Station, FM 107.1. This program this afternoon has been pre-recorded. We've recorded this Friday. And as I opened at the earlier portion of the program, noted these are friends of mine who unfortunately are members of a unique sorority fraternity, a very unique club, a club of lost loved ones that have given their lives for all intents and purposes, and I say their lives, the lives of their children, husbands, brothers, sons, fathers, sisters, voluntarily. That's the real thing here, voluntarily. And I look at Jim and Trish Slape and realize that you gave your son's life voluntarily. And we were talking about this earlier. He volunteered for the National Guard. He volunteered for a very dangerous MOS, specialty, explosive ordnance, EOD, explosive ordnance demolition. People know them from UDT days, but the task now is significant. And EOD personnel, by the way, travel with even ammunition that's related to use by your own side. So that just in case there's need to take care of removing ordnance that might not be fully exploded, things of this nature. I have some experience, not personally, had it on my ship though when I was in the Navy. But back to the issue. This is a dangerous situation. We were talking about this a few moments ago with Trish, that and Jim, that you recognize that he had selected a dangerous mission, a dangerous activity, and anybody in uniform always is in a point of extremis anyhow, even when they're training. I mean, they're training for the ultimate experience or ultimate situation. All right, let's go back to this topic of Jim. He is now a sergeant in the Army National Guard. He is married, and he's headed off to Afghanistan. What were your feelings about that expectation when you heard that he was going for Afghanistan? What was the length of tour? Was that going to be 6 months, 9 months?
9 months.
9 months. And I mean, Jim, in your process, here's your son taking off. Any words of advice you gave to him?
It's hard to say. It's one of those things. He went through quite a bit of training, so you sort of know after all of that. And as smart as he was, you knew he knew more about the subject than you did.
Yeah.
So it's basic stuff. Be careful, watch your back. Think about things 2, 3, 4 times. Just be very, 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 very careful, and take it seriously. Don't discount anything.
When did he leave for Vietnam? For Afghanistan, Trish?
It was May of 2018 was when he got in country.
I thought he left in April to go to Fort Hood.
Yeah.
For prep to go over.
Preparation.
Yeah. He spent the several months, January, February, and March, training. That they had intensive training before they actually deployed. So he was gone quite a bit up to the actual deployment. And then, like Jim said, he went down to Texas for about a month before he got in country in Afghanistan.
After he got in country, any communications? What was the communications at that point?
It actually was quite open for the most part. They had their phones, they had their computers, so we could text, we could call. And we didn't email, but so we had communication. I don't think Jim. I know I didn't reach out every day because he was busy.
Right.
I didn't want to, distract him and hound him and cause issues. And he was married, so it wasn't my place to be mother hen anymore. So I would reach out, every few days, just, hey, checking in, how you doing, how's it going. I tried to keep it very, light, very, I didn't want to compromise what he was doing,
Right.
put him in a position that he, did anything wrong or said anything wrong. So, I tended to keep things very light and very superficial in my communications with him.
Jim, were there any comments from him during that program that while he was in Afghanistan? And by the way, Sergeant Jim Slape, who died in Afghanistan, but were there any conversations you had with him or any texts that indicated that it was challenging, or what was?
He downplayed pretty much everything.
Okay.
I kind of figured it was very challenging, very dangerous. But I don't think he wanted to worry us. So he always said everything was fine, and he had everything that he needed.
Did you believe that, Trish? Everything was fine.
Okay, I did.
Okay.
Because we've lived here since '89 in a military community. I've worked with the public during the most of that time. Had a lot of people that deployed. We've got 2 Marine bases, a lot of deployments. I had never firsthand known anybody that was killed overseas.
All right. Back to you, Jim, on that. So he was giving you comfort as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I would ask him questions too. Like, are you going out frequently? You have a lot of missions, and he was always downplaying it. No, no big deal. It's fairly. Light over here. We have everything we need. We have all the equipment we need. We have all the training we need. We're fine. And I think it was in his nature to not worry us and to try to downplay anything that was going on as much as possible, just because he didn't want us to worry about him being over there.
Okay, we're going to bring in a fourth person in this conversation. He has a brother too.
Yeah.
And what were the communications? And we're going to talk about this in relationship to the events that led to his death, but also now the memory of it all. But what was the communications between he and his brother? And do you have any idea?
Well, at that time there was none because William was at basic training.
So William was also involved in the military.
Yes. And now leading up to that, I do think William and Jimmy spoke a little bit, Jimmy giving him advice and, you sure about this? And these are the things that you need to do. These are the things you don't need to do,
right.
That type of stuff. But once William went to basic training, there was no communication at all. But between the two, at the time, I kept telling Jimmy to write William a letter. He needs to have communication. And Jimmy, like Jim said, Jimmy was like, okay, yeah, I will. Yeah, I'm working on it. Yeah, I'm working on it. William came back later and said, him being in Afghanistan and me being at basic training, he wouldn't have been allowed to send me that letter, which I didn't know that.
Right.
But he did write the letter, and after what happened, William was given the letter.
All right. Jim, of course, now you've got both sons in the military.
Right.
Committed. This is we're here 2023. A lot's happened since then. It was a different time then. I mean, there was activity in Afghanistan. We had not withdrawn. And there were still IEDs and there was still, active action there. What was your feeling about William and now your son Jim both being in the military?
Well, I mean, you try not to dwell on the possibilities and the dangers, and I think any sort of military service has inherent danger. Even
Right.
the simplest or what you would consider the safest, there's danger involved. So you try not to worry about it, and you try to sort of go on with your life. But there's a lot of fear there, especially with the son in Afghanistan. And there's news story after news story after news story of soldiers dying.
I want to go back to that, and we're going to two more segments here with our guests Jim and Trish Slape, because we're in 2023. We're out of Afghanistan. We're basically withdrawn from a lot of major conflicts, and of course we have a conflict in Ukraine underway right now. I'm going to be interested in your observations about that. But I'm thinking, and I just want to mention this to really hold myself accountable to ask you this question a little later on. Now that so many years have passed, have we lost sort of an understanding and I'm not you, us, the rest of the country, have we lost some contact? I think we have. We'll talk about that in just a moment. More to come here on Viewpoints, and again with Trish and Jim Slape, and we're talking about their son, Sergeant Jim Slape, who, by the way, is, I think, wonderfully memorialized in Beaufort at the Gold Star Monument. We'll talk about that as well in just a moment here on Viewpoints. Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107.1. This afternoon's program has been pre-recorded. I've asked guests, our friends of mine to be exact, to please participate in this program. It's a tough program for them, for sure. Less tougher for me, because I'm always sensitive to the circumstances that they are feeling and dealing with throughout their lives. And we're talking with Jim and Trish Slape related to the death of their son, Jim Slape. They have a son, William, as we talked about just a few moments ago, who's also serving in the military. And so let's go to I'm going to go to the tough part here, the moment it all came about. And I do recall having talked to you about this in past, Jim. Let's, if you will, set the stage. It's 2018, August, if I'm not mistaken? October 2018. And your son, Jim, has been in theater in Afghanistan, National Guardsman, not a weekend warrior, in theater in Afghanistan, explosive ordnance demolition. He's a sergeant. If you will, as best you can, because I can stress that it's tough. I feel badly about, but what were the circumstances? How did it all come about? As far as you were concerned, how did you find out?
Well, I guess for me, and it is a tough thing to talk about, but for me, each day I would check the news before I left work just to see if anybody had been killed. And I remember on the day that he was killed, I was very busy at work. I had a meeting after work, so I didn't have time to really look at the news. On my way out the door, I thought, well, I'm going to check it real quick. I checked it. I went through all the news stories. The last news story was a news story about a soldier being killed that day, and I thought, it's going to be tough to look at the news every day and wonder, if that's my son. And I thought, I can't do this. I think at the time there were 50,000 troops, U.S. troops in Afghanistan. I thought, the odds are in his favor. It's not him. It's going to be okay. But, when I got home, it's tough to describe, but I wasn't supposed to go home that day. I went home because Jimmy's dog had, for some reason, gone a little bit crazy and torn up the bedroom door, and he shredded it. and he had left blood on the door from shredding this
Chewing
door.
through it.
And I thought, what got into this dog? But I thought, I don't have time. I've got a meeting I've got to run to. So I look at the door. I think, okay, it's not too bad. I can replace it this weekend. Went back outside to get in my truck to leave. And that's when I saw the soldiers in dress uniform. And when you've got somebody deployed, you know what that means. And they don't have to say anything. You know why they're there. I think everybody knows why they're there. They don't come to ask how you're doing. They don't come to say, hey, your son's been injured, but he's going to be fine. They come there for one reason. And that was the beginning of all of this.
So you had been at work. You had to come home to check on that door.
Right.
And you were going back to work. Trish, you were not at home?
I was at work.
You were at work.
I had called him because the dog was behaving
Wildly.
weirdly.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't hang out in our bedroom. Our cats were in our bedrooms. We had the door. We kept it shut, not because of him, but because of other cats. But it was the whole morning that I was there, he kept trying to get in the bedroom. It was like he had to be there with me. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on with him. So when I left for work, I gated him in the living room. He got the gate open and he chewed through the bedroom door. When my daughter-in-law got home, she texted me a picture of it, and like he said, there were shards of wood all over the floor, and he was in the bedroom. And so I called him and I said, we need to replace the door because we've got to keep my cats in there. Uh-huh. And so, like I said, in retrospect, and I know some people think whatever they think, Jimmy was there.
I know where you were going with that.
And his dog knew it.
I know where you were
And
going.
he had to be with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew before we did.
I don't disagree with that premonition at all.
So in subsequent conversations with Jimmy's teammates that were over in Afghanistan and speaking with the casualty affairs officers on the timelines, the timeline matched up. So,
Jim, you are now seeing these Army officers, or I say officers, coming to your house. Who was it that was arriving midday for you, for all intents and purposes? What time? They didn't. There was no call in advance or anything of this nature. They just came to the house.
Right. They just show up at the house.
So I'm assuming that they would have shown up and stayed there until you had arrived home.
Well, they did. In fact, I don't know what time they got there, but they had said that they had gotten there much earlier and were waiting for someone to come home.
That's an interesting background on that. It wasn't a phone call. They didn't even want to advise you in advance. I say that. I think that's an interesting observation. And the reason I say that is they know the impact of this message.
mm-hmm.
But I think that's why they do it in person. The notifications are done in person.
Yeah. Who was it that? And I'm looking at you on this, Jim, since you were the first one to meet them. Who were they?
I don't know.
Were they chaplain? Was there a chaplain?
Well,
Chaplain
I
was
assume
it a major or
it's
a
the
colonel?
same way in every case, but there's a chaplain that's there.
Okay.
He was a major, and then there was a sergeant there to do the official notification. And they weren't there to notify me, and I kind of found that out as they talked to me. They were there to notify our daughter-in-law.
Okay.
So
Right.
they didn't make the official notification until she was there. So obviously I knew why they were there, but they wouldn't make the official notification until she
Okay.
was present.
How did your daughter-in-law and Trish know to come home? Did you call them?
She actually was there at home at the time.
She was? Okay. Okay.
Which is another point entirely, because again, I wasn't supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So she would have gotten the notification
Solo.
by herself, which I think it would have been very difficult. Anyway, it's one of those cases where she and I walked into the kitchen together, and as soon as she saw them, she knew what had happened. We hadn't talked about it. None of us talked about it, but when the soldiers in dress uniform show up, you know what they're there for. No one has to say it. We don't have to talk about it ahead of time. We all knew when we saw them what they were there for.
Trish, how did you? What happened then?
Jim called me at work and said I need to come home. My first thought was that the dog had killed one of the cats.
Right.
And Jim, he doesn't tell me things on the phone. He just says you need to come home.
Yeah.
And the really weird thing was, I went to my boss and I said, I need to go home. I don't know what's going on. I know it's serious. The only other time Jim has said this is when my mom died.
When your mother died?
So I should have known. But I didn't. Like I said, my mind was focused on the dog and the cats.
Mm-hmm.
So I drove home and I saw the government car, but my head was so far in the sand on these things at the time.
But it was
that
right
didn't-
after Hurricane Florence too, and there were a lot of people in the neighborhood,
Yeah,
insurance people,
and
everybody
I was
else.
dealing with something with a job of mine that, so I just, my mind went in all other directions. And so Jim comes out of the house. I said, what's going on? He's like, oh, and I'm like, no, what's going on? He goes, and like he said, I saw them walk out. When you see the men in uniform, then you know. The car didn't give it away, but the men in uniform do. So then I knew.
This portion of the program, of course, we're talking with Jim and Trish Slape, and I think the important part of this segment is the depth of the event, the experience. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Viewpoints here on Memorial Day weekend and Memorial Day. And I'm going to repeat something that Jim said to me if he doesn't repeat it in our conversation here in just a few moments. Stay with us, so please, here on Viewpoints. Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107.1. We're talking with Jim and Trish Slape, and we've had a quick break and a needed break. We're talking with them here Friday, they had a beginning of Memorial Day weekend, and we've just discussed the experience they had with acknowledgement. They understand well, if you will, the announcement, the experience they had when they were told that their son had been killed in Afghanistan, October 2018, and an explosive ordnance demolition, as you just pointed out, Trish. We had just been through Hurricane Florence. I forgot about that. So life was disrupted in so many ways. Okay, Jim, Trish, you didn't sit at home and just collapse. And I say that because of something you did that you accomplished in 2020, and it's the Gold Star Monument. But before I get into that, real quickly, for those of us that need to recognize the sacrifice that you have made as parents. His wife has made as a spouse, Will, his brother. What would you say to us relative to those experiences that you had? How would you recommend I should respond, or if I know that a family down the street has had this experience, and we just had a recent experience with Caleb Gore, who came home from an accident, military accident, killed, along with, I think, 6 other, 8.
There were 9 total.
9 total in a military accident, Marine Corps. And
No, they were Army. It was two Black Hawk helicopter collided.
And he returned home. His body was brought home. What can we do as a community in those circumstances? Your thoughts, Jim?
Well, I think first off, this community is very, very good at supporting the military and very patriotic. And certainly when they did our transfer from Cherry Point back to here, people lining the streets and waving the flag and all of that. I think we're very fortunate.
At Glad Tidings Church. It filled the church.
Yeah.
I mean, the community. I appreciate that. But what can we do personally?
That's a tough thing, because there's really nothing that can undo what's happened. I think people just have to keep in mind that there are soldiers in harm's way. Many didn't make it back from Afghanistan, and we can't forget their sacrifice. And that includes us too. You know, our son made the ultimate sacrifice. We will never forget that. But I think it's important for others to remember that as well, that there are people fighting for us and for our freedoms, and they're putting their life on the line.
And the role that parents, family members, spouses, brothers, sisters, children play in this, and the point of you, Trish, along with Maria Myers, and Jim and others, I don't want to discount them, went out and found the money to erect the Gold Star Monument. It's a beautiful monument, by the way.
It is beautiful.
It is. And what's fascinating about it is the piece of granite that's missing, which creates a silhouette of a
missing soldier.
Missing soldier. You've worked hard on that.
We did.
I'm going to ask a very challenging question. Do we appreciate what that really is saying? I question if we do.
I think a lot of people don't understand it.
What does it say?
So the kind of what we've been saying here today, my perception of it was, yes, the Gold Star families need to be remembered, but more for the sacrifice of their loved one. That's what we want, is for people to remember our loved one and to know that they mattered and what they did mattered. Somebody recently, because I've been hearing a lot of the Memorial Day programs leading up to this weekend, and they say, when someone thanks for my service, my response is always, thank you for being worthy.
Ooh.
Or making, something along those lines. But thank you for making it worth it.
I understand.
And that's what we all need to get back to, is to be worthy of their sacrifice. And it can be something as simple as, they have this pay it forward. Well, yeah, pay it forward. Help out military organizations. Help out veterans organizations, Gold Star family organizations. Help them. I cringe inside when I hear stories of veterans being ignored. We have a horrible statistic of veteran suicide, active duty suicide. We have a horrible statistic of homeless veterans, mentally ill veterans that aren't getting the help that they need. And we need to be more proactive in finding out how we can help them. What can we do? Whether it's, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can donate money. Right. There is something that each one of us can do within our means.
Jim and Trish Slape with us this afternoon. We're talking about the fact that they are a Gold Star family. And Gold Star family is recognized as a family that has lost a loved one in military service, ostensibly in theater, in war zones, but regardless. And we mentioned Caleb Gore a few moments ago, training, but they're training in a moment of extreme. They are training as if they are really in the event. Mm-hmm. So it's, in reality, it's theater. It's just, I use that word not meaning to play acting, but it is a moment where there's actual event and threat of their lives and livelihood is at risk. All right, just a comment from me, because I strongly recognize and appreciate the death of Sergeant Jim Slape. But I like to point out his career is established. His future has been determined. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this to you and get your final comments on this. But my perception of that is you and his wife, and in the cases of children and brothers and sisters, that this is a loss or a destruction of a dream or of what could have been. Am I accurate in that? And that's my opinion is, to you, I owe the greatest allegiance. I can't do anything for Jim, but to your comment a moment ago, Jim should know that we have your back, or as they would say, we have his six.
Yes.
And so that's my thought. Is that an accurate display?
I think that is, yes.
Jim? I think so. I think that's not only important to the soldiers, but it's important to the families as well. They want to know their family's going to be taken care of if something happens to them.
And I liked your comment a moment ago about another activity that we can think about on Memorial Day is how we can help those veterans, how we can help those families, even those that have active duty personnel in their alive and well. That's a very good point. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. And Jim, I'm hoping you'll remember what you told me about Memorial Day.
I think I remember exactly what I said.
To me, as we wrap it up, it's a sentence I have never forgotten. So, with that, I want to thank Jim and Trish Slape, brother William, married, and his wife now, of course.
No, William's not married, but
no, I'm sorry.
Jimmy's wife, Sean.
A widow.
Yes.
But you said something, Jim, that I think we should close with, if you will, about Memorial Day.
And it has to do with, and trust me, I understand completely because we were the same way. Before Jimmy was killed, Memorial Day was the usual, as the beginning of the summer. You took a few moments, maybe on Monday, to remember those that were lost and thank them for their sacrifice. But it didn't hit home to you. Now that we're on the other side of that and Jimmy's been killed, we're a Gold Star family, the feeling has totally changed. It's the other extreme. For us now, every day is Memorial Day, not just the one day the government says we're going to recognize those that are lost, but every day for us. I think about Jimmy every single day. I think for everybody else, one day a year is probably not too much to ask to remember those that have died and given their lives voluntarily, like you said, for this country. It's a small thing to ask, I think.
A very small thing to ask. And as we close this program out here on Viewpoints, and again, my deepest appreciation for Trish and Jim Slape to allow me to do this. Thank you very much. 2018, Sergeant Jim Slape, one of many, ladies and gentlemen. And as Jim just said a moment ago, today we pause to recognize for Jim and Trish Slape and for all those who are Gold Star families, this is not just one day.